Hello and welcome to this edition of the Sparx Tribune Report. My name is Devin Jones. You can find me on Twitter at the user handle provided in the description box below and on the Sparx Tribune. That's Sparx, spelled Sparx with an X, sparxtribune.org. John Bolton, who has positioned himself as the orchestrator of the hawkishness of U.S. foreign policy for the last 30 years, has played a pivotal role in manufacturing the consent of the American people for endless war. Bolton, most recently appointed as National Security Advisor to the Trump administration, has been fired, or, if one is to believe Bolton's account, resigned, with there being a public dispute between the two parties as to whether Bolton offered his resignation or whether it was requested. More importantly than assessing which liar is telling the truth in this matter is how CNN's editor-at-large, Editor-in-Chief Chris Cillizza, covered the story in his analysis, an analysis which reads as follows. I'll read it to you here. This is from CNN. It states, John Bolton's firing shows again that Donald Trump has zero plan. John Bolton's firing shows again that Donald Trump has a zero plan. So what would they call a plan? What would CNN's editor-in-chief call having a plan? Well, first of all, in order to address that, we must address a certain word that the mainstream press, that the intelligence community, that's another buzzword. It means the CIA and the FBI, but what they would refer to as war, engagement. They use the term engagement. We are engaged around the world, spreading death and democracy. And so being engaged around the world and being willing to engage around the world, buzzword for war, bombing various brown people, that a lack of engagement or desire to engage is being an isolationist, a protectionist, in progressive terminology, anti-war. And that is precisely what they are against, the anti-war voice. And Chris Cillizza, being an acquiescent mouthpiece for the corporate media and the corporate state, reflects that in the wording of the headline, attempting to portray the move of firing John Bolton as being a buffoonish act of isolationist protectionism, and they'll attempt to portray this as being bad for the nation, when in fact the nation does not support endless war and has not supported endless war. And this, by the way, as we approach the 2020 election, is likely a move by Trump to curry the favor of voters who, by the way, when he campaigned in 2016, did so on a platform of peace. He claimed he was going to remove the troops from the Middle East and stop engaging with the world. He made that promise. Now, why he nominated John Bolton as his national security advisor in the first place is inexplicable and unbeknownst to me, albeit the move to fire him does come after several months of consistent disagreement between the two parties as to how the United States goes about foreign affairs. And so to the people, by the way, while we're on that subject, that are suggesting that Donald Trump is only going to nominate someone twice as bad, like he has done in the past with previous advisors and cabinet members, I think it's worth noting the reason that he fired John Bolton in the first place. John Bolton wants to lie us into another war, and love Trump or hate him, Donald Trump is opposed to that. I think he has shown that in cases involving Syria, Venezuela, and currently discussing Afghanistan. Pardon me. At any rate, moving on, according to a poll from The Economist and YouGov, today, September the 11th, this poll came out, support for Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has seen a dramatic increase, bringing Warren to a statistical tie with former Vice President Joe Biden, who he has until now, by the way, managed a wide lead over the rest of the field up until this point. I have seen but one poll where anyone did better than Joe Biden, and it was Kamala Harris, and it was a couple of months ago, just after Harris attacked Biden based upon his opposition to busing. And Kamala Harris basically called him a racist, and then she jumped up and he went down. That was brief. He came back up in the polls again and has again maintained a strong lead over the rest, sometimes a 10-point lead over the second place contender, which at that point was Senator Sanders. Warren has purportedly been given second place now, having increased in her support above Senator Sanders, and now gaining on Joe Biden. And it's in a statistical tie with Joe Biden. Support for Senator Bernie Sanders has purportedly declined. And the same poll places Sanders at 16. We have Warren and Biden tied at 26 with Sanders given 16 points in the poll. That's a 10-point lead. Joe Biden, with the history that he does on economic issues, on social issues, on gaffe after gaffe after gaffe, is purportedly still maintaining a 10-point lead over Sanders, even excluding Warren from the conversation briefly. But Warren has been on the consistent rise. That, by the way, is not taking one poll by itself to acknowledge that, although this is the only poll that we have seen that places the two in a statistical tie. So, but again, even as a long-term stretch of polling and analysis of those polls show, mostly from Economist and YouGov polls, bear that in mind, that's called a variable in science and experimentation. That's called a variable. All of these polls are Economist and YouGov polls. Real Clear Politics vary a little bit. But these are points of concern. Why Joe Biden maintains the lead he does. Why is Sanders polling so low, or purportedly polling so low? Why is it that Elizabeth Warren has continuously increased and now jumped up, spiked in the polls to a statistical tie with Joe Biden, even as we learn, by the way, that Elizabeth Warren has been consulting Hillary Clinton, the 2016 Democratic nominee, consulting her in the background, and maintained a line of communication, according to NBC News. So, if you can tell a person by who their friends are, let it be duly noted that Elizabeth Warren's friend is Hillary Clinton. So, and that's not the only thing. I mean, Elizabeth Warren has voted to increase the military budget twice. Yes, she has certain good policy positions. She claims to support Medicare for all. She had backtracked on that and then unbacktracked from that in the past. That's a point of concern, especially if you're going to consider yourself, fighting for something that you would need to fight for Medicare for all. It's not like a majority of Congress currently supports Medicare for all. You would have to be a candidate that fights for that position. Elizabeth Warren, if she can't even manage to stay true to the position without backtracking and then unbacktracking again, might not be a very good idea, even on domestic policy. So bear all of this in mind as if we're looking at it like, well, at least she's better than Joe. At least grumpy old Joe is on his way down and out. Well, that's not really good. Having Joe Biden as the front of the moderate side of the Democratic Party is positive in that it's easy to point at Joe Biden and a long history of ugliness and political stupidity and racism and gaffes and say, yeah, there's your guy, there's your candidate. If it were between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, this would be easier. However, with someone like Elizabeth Warren, who tries to portray herself as being a leading progressive and a progressive frontrunner at that, might be a little bit more of a smokescreen to have to blow away in order to show people, like, look, this is not the progressive candidate. And the more that we learn about Elizabeth Warren, the less and less I personally support her myself. The same with the death blow in my mind. I had previously been optimistic about the candidacy of Pete Buttigieg, who, by the way, also has been increasing in popularity, albeit rather slowly. He's polling at 11%, according to another poll that is not an Economist YouGov poll. Emerson. It was an Emerson poll, had Joe Buttigieg at 11%. So, but he turned around and he spoke to Hillary Clinton for campaign advice. That was a red flag. After already having the situation involving his home state and the police and the sheriff, the cop that he should have fired, he didn't fire them. He had a scandal he had to deal with for 3 or 4 days. Every video he uploaded to YouTube had been pertaining to his responses to the ongoing scandal there. And him, according to Young Turks reporting, according to them, he knew about it already. And the I don't know was a lie on the part of Buttigieg. So that was the first red flag. The second and big red flag was, I'm going to consult Hillary Clinton for campaign advice. Oh, goody. Why? Again, are we judging who someone is by who their friends are? Then red flag, over and out. Senator Sanders has been rather consistent, however, on the issue, being asked on The View, and I think it was Whoopi Goldberg that asked him the question, would you consult Hillary Clinton for campaign advice, pointing out that other candidates had been doing so. Sanders, and I loved his response to this, said, and I quote, I think not. Good answer, Senator Sanders. That's what we want to hear. I think not. and pointed out the fact that they have fundamental disagreements in policy, and of course. But at any rate, I just wanted to point that out, the trend there, what's going on with the polls, the ousting of John Bolton. We will be learning in the next few days who the replacement will be. Keep an eye out on that. And this has been the Sparx Tribune Report. Again, you can find me on Twitter at the user handle provided in the description box below and on the Sparx Tribune. That is Sparx, again, spell Sparx with an X, sparxtribune.org, and you have a nice day.